Hello, my fellow thinkers and dreamers. You are listening to Mind Palace Musings, and I am your host, David Wellman. We have talked about consciousness a few times already in the podcast. Out of the episodes I've already recorded, I think most of them have been about consciousness. It's a very interesting, deep topic that you can tackle at many angles. It's like a great onion of existence, and the deeper you get, the more it makes you cry because of your anguish of being conscious. So, today I am going to talk about the significance of being conscious now, which I will elaborate on later. To get us back up to speed, consciousness can be defined as awareness or sentience of internal or external existence. It's something that we have pondered for millennia as humans, from the simple farmhand to the great philosophers of old. We have all stood and stared up into the sky and wondered, why the fuck do I have to do another day of this? So, without further ado, let us get started with today's episode. You are conscious now. Let's start off with some assumptions. Everyone is conscious, not just you, the listener, or me, the speaker. Consciousness, or what I might refer to as the soul, resides either outside of this material reality or is some kind of force that can move on and inhabit a new body after your death. This is not your first time on Earth, and it's probably not your last time, but it might be. This episode isn't aiming to expose anything new about consciousness. I'm not trying to trigger any new thoughts or feelings towards the concept. Rather, I want to talk about the significance of you and I being conscious at this moment. So, what do I mean by the significance of being conscious now? What I mean is, at time of recording, we are currently all present in 2020, 12,000 years after human society started, or anyway, recorded society. We aren't currently living through life as peasants in medieval France, nor are we living as the Aztecs and the Spanish conquistadors. We aren't currently discovering or rediscovering America, and we aren't raiding coastal villages as the Norse. We aren't ducking our heads between the hail of bullets in World War I. We are here now, today. Now, as humans, we experience time linearly, which makes sense to this, but why are we conscious of this time period now and not some other one? Well, we'll get there. Let's start with some boring answers first. We can look at it from a biological perspective, starting with the one miracle that science is allowed, that being that the Big Bang happened and everything came from nothing. It's very much a because that's just how it is, we'll solve the rest. You exist as you do today because of circumstance. Your parents got horny. Your sperm won the race. Well, actually, your sperm profited off the hard work of some other sperms, which, procrastination is in our blood. Consciousness formed inside the body that was born, and that was molded into you. This doesn't make for a very interesting conversation, because if we look at it from modern neurology or biology, it's a non-question. It's not worth asking. It's just, you're here now because this is when your particular meat suit was born. Neurology is still trying to solve for consciousness, and until we get there, you can't really start having meta questions about it. You need the foundational basis for it. Next, we can move on to a religious answer, and this is speaking of the religions that don't believe in reincarnation. This is your one life. It has been planned from the beginning of time. God has some kind of plan for you. Of course, I'm going from this from a Christian standpoint just because I know the most about that. I'm sure there are other major religions that don't believe in reincarnation that have other ideas. But anyway, this moment was planned, and you were meant to be born the time you were born, and that's why you are conscious now. When you die, eternity. I think this is kind of silly to put eternity in the hands of such transient beings. As humans, we get a brief sneeze in the grand scheme of time. We are so insignificant. But to base man's immortal life thereafter based on the actions on a small green rock is absolutely silly. This does not sound like the actions of an all-loving, all-powerful God. It sounds like the actions of either something incredibly bored wanting to toy with its creations or an absolute sadist and psychopath. Now, sure, you could argue I am applying human morality to the situation, and yeah, I am. But just something to think about. It does seem a bit silly that if we were immortal beings, that we had an immortal soul, that you'd have one brief stint on Earth and then the rest of that eternity is set up that you're either going to be in Elysium or hell. It seems like something the church would say to get people to come to church and pay their tithes. Discussion for another day. Let's talk about a concept I used to call the consciousness paradox. I didn't realize there was an actual philosophical term for it, which would make sense since I'm just an armchair philosopher and haven't done too much reading into mainstream philosophy, which maybe I should, and I'll get there eventually. Anyway, what I used to refer to that as the consciousness paradox is explored as the other mind's problem. I am conscious, and I know that I'm conscious. You know that you are conscious, but we have absolutely no way to prove that to each other. If this were some simulation, either designed by a computer or some biological means, and I was put in here as the only conscious inhabitant, of course everything else would seem conscious. It's required for a passable simulation. If it wasn't believable, then I wouldn't be kept here. That wouldn't make any sense. So the other mind's problem for this episode, we are going to just say that we are all currently conscious and living in this moment. All other beings in this life or simulation or plane or whatever it turns out to be are all consciously living. Think of it as some grand scale multiplayer VR game. We are all participants. There are no NPCs. Maybe there are. But yes, this is a specific topic that I do quite like and would like to give it the credit it deserves and give it its own episode. So, I mentioned religion earlier, but in a non-reincarnative sense. Now I'd like to talk about it with reincarnation in mind. Reincarnation can be defined as the philosophical or religious belief that the non-physical essence of a living being starts a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. This was explored in the first episode of the podcast, with the consciousness being a signal that bodies could latch onto rather than something generated by the biological processes of the body. This is a very common belief in Indian religions, some Orthodox Jewish beliefs, and beliefs shared between Native Americans and Aboriginal Australians. Even some prominent Greek figures, such as Pythagoras, Socrates, and Plato, believed in reincarnation in some form. It's also very important for the Tibetans and their spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. It's not a notion considered at all by modern science or biology. It's completely been thrown out, which I think is unfair to these religions that have been going on for longer than science has, that modern Western reductionist materialistic science would jump in and say, no, it's wrong, can't see it on a graph. Doesn't sound like the sign of an intellectual that can accept thoughts that they don't believe. You know, the sign of intelligence is to be able to entertain ideas without subscribing to them. And just shutting them down seems against that. But in any case, Buddhism brings karma into the mix, believing life to be a constant cycle of life and death, with karma changing your starting point in your next life. If you are a good person, you will be born into a good position in the next life, and the same if you are a bad person. It's kind of the self-perfecting spiral. This cycle is essentially endless, to live and die again, ad nauseum, ad infinitum, except it can be broken through achieving nirvana or enlightenment, to live your lives, multiple, not just the one, in such a way that you eventually achieve this enlightenment and move on to the next stage of life, whatever that might be. There's also an interesting concept in short story called The Egg, which I have mentioned. It was written by the same author of The Martian. And the concept of that is Earth is, well, an egg. It's an incubatory stage for us as a young and growing God that will, once we have lived every single human life, move on to our next stage, whatever that might be. I am you and you are me. Everything is connected, and we are all the same person living each moment at different times. It has heavy ties to reincarnation, though karma may or may not be absent in this idea. We have to live every life, the good and the bad, like roles in a play that must be filled. So, why am I talking about this concept of living many lives? Well, the idea with this concept is that while we have lived lives in the past, and it may not even be in the past, because while humans might feel and experience time linearly, that may not be the case for a higher dimensional being. In any case, we don't remember our previous lives. Some believe it is possible to access these memories through deep meditation, hypnosis, or the use of psychoactive drugs. Children aged 2 to 5 may even recall past lives with vivid detail that a child of that age shouldn't be able to know. Some children talk of being soldiers in a war that can shown to have actually happened, World War II, for example. This is also thought to potentially explain phobias with no basis. For example, being afraid of heights may indicate that in a past life that child or person may have died from a big fall. Some also think that birthmarks show how we died in our past life. So if you've got a small little round patch somewhere, maybe you were shot. Many will say this is very woo-woo, but it's being researched seriously by many people, such as Dr. Jim Tucker, who has been studying it for around 20 years now, and is now a director of the Division of Perceptual Studies. I will link an article of this very study that he's been doing in the description, since I did get some feedback on previous episodes, and people did say it would be nice if I would link some of the stuff I have researched, so enjoy. All that being said, it still doesn't really explain why we are here currently. Why is it 2020? Well, here are some of my theories anyway, with some cool catchy names. Let's get started. The self-perfecting spiral. Life is a constant cycle of pain and suffering, but it gets better with each iteration. Each time you live and die, you learn something. You slowly perfect some aspect of your soul. You may have to live through a very harsh life and existence to learn pain. You may have to suffer a life of tragedy and loss to learn how to let go and move on. You may have to live a life of comfort and even royalty to learn how it feels to be truly alone, to not know who to trust, to not know any genuine connections. Like a cosmic experience bar, you're slowly grinding for those levels. Now, why are you conscious now? You're conscious now because you have perfected the spiral. This is your last life and you're taking a victory lap. Your previous lives all happened, but you were not present for them. This one is the one that you did it. Congrats. Shh, the good part is coming. Something remarkable is going to happen in this lifetime. Something so amazing and life-changing that you have to consciously witness it yourself. You've been given awareness of your conscious existence for this lifetime so that you may witness this event. It's 2020 and a lot of shit's been going on, so this may be it. We might be here. Buckle up. Once you see it and you have died, you might not be present for future lifetimes after that, or maybe you will be once another one of these existence-changing events happens. One of many. Every single human life is being simulated at once. You just got this specific one. When you die, every single life will be merged back into the greater consciousness. All memories are assimilated. What happened in the 1300s and what's happening today are happening at the same time. Just our specific simulated slice is happening at a time that's been generated to have happened later in the chronological order of things. But as far as the simulation goes, it's all happening at once. The existence exists as some grand number cruncher, the problem it's trying to solve being human existence. You are just one of the worker drones that has picked up a batch process, and you've gotten stuck with one specific human life, and you are simply living it as it is meant to be lived. The graduation year. Congrats, you lived every single life there was to live. Or maybe this is the specific life in which you achieve enlightenment. This is very similar to the self-perfecting spiral. All these lives happened simultaneously, and you managed to play every single character in the simulator. This is your last year in the school of life, being Earth, or humanity as it were. And once you die, you will be greeted at your graduation ceremony, ready to move on to the next phase. Enjoy this one, it's the last one you get, and you should celebrate it. Well done. Pure coincidence. Time marches on, entropy encroaches. The material universe does not care. The heat death of the universe gets closer and closer each passing moment. You being here and now is pure coincidence. There's no rhyme or reason to it, and it is simply pure chaos theory that you exist at all. Don't worry too much, because it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. I got a bit dark with that last one, and I'm sorry. I have been told that I can inspire existential spirals inwards with some of the things I say, but that is life as a human. It is our very being to question our very being. I could keep going on and on with these kind of short snippets and theories, but why don't you let me know some of your own in the comments of whatever platform you are watching this on, or on Twitter, or on Reddit. I'd be happy to hear them, even discuss them. So let's talk about some implications of this episode. Live your life like it's your last, because it very well might be. Interesting things are bound to happen, and they're happening as we speak. Don't worry about what you achieve compared to others. It's silly to compare your own personal progress to that of someone else, and for all you know, that might be you living a different life. Death might be something exciting to look forward to. We may enter a new stage of existence after it. That being said, cherish your life on Earth while you have it, because you're here for a reason. Or maybe not. Live in the moment, because it's significant that we get to live in the moment at all. My dear seekers of truth and knowledge, my fellow thinkers and dreamers, thank you for listening. I hope I could have touched upon some of your brain nodules, your neurons, fired off new ideas, put interest into your life, inspired some novelty, made you think about why you were sitting here listening to me talk. Maybe there's some kind of significant reason to it. Maybe not. Who cares? You're having a good time. I'm having a good time. If you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please leave some feedback, give it a like, subscribe. I don't know what platform you're on. Maybe you can tell Siri to do it for you. I'm not sure. You can join the discussion on Reddit, Twitter, Podbean, wherever else this might be available. The details are in the description. This has been Mind Palace Musings, and I have been your host, David Wellman. Stay curious.